Welcome to Channels Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. We have reached the end of 2023, and what a year it has been. In the UK, we have witnessed hundreds of thousands of workers take industrial action, the coronation of King Charles III, the return of Lord David Cameron, and further away from this island, of course, a war is raging between Israel and Hamas. Channels Business Global has covered it all, and on today's show, we'll be reviewing some of the highlights, beginning with the highs and lows of Rishi Sunak, who began the year with 5 key promises. Rishi Sunak has used his first New Year's address to British voters to pledge to boost the economy. The Prime Minister promised to work night and day to deliver on the most pressing challenges, which also include halving inflation, reducing debt, cutting hospital waiting lists and stopping migrant crossings.
So I don't think we've seen a Prime Minister come out right at the beginning of the year and give these 5 promises that he has. I think it points a little bit to the fact that Labour are 26 points ahead in the polls, and they're worried. They're losing successive by-elections, the Conservatives, and they're just looking ahead to, they're trying to do sort of maybe a 12-month plan and trying to come out the other side and be a little bit more electable than they are at the moment. So he didn't need to do this. But yeah, 5 promises, halving inflation, obviously that was his main push when he came in as Prime Minister. He said, under the Truss government, he said he'd already predicted that her policies were going to raise inflation, so that's a big one. Grow the economy. Successive governments have tried to grow the economy, of course. It sounds good, and it's a big Conservative push. The government's hope is that the country might be through the worst of the recession and then it's on the up again, but that's, quite a positive thing. National debt falling, that's another sort of Conservative promise, and Mr. Sunak wants to come across as kind of fiscally credible compared to the last government and compared to maybe Labour governments that often have spent too much, that they would say. Hold him accountable to the NHS. He says he's going to halve waiting lists over 2 years. That's a big one for everyone, really, but the Labour Party obviously want to appear to be the party that can be trusted with the NHS. And then stop boats crossing the Channel is his 5th promise. That is, again, a big sort of Conservative backbencher thing. I think going into these elections, which are quite important because they're a kind of bellwether as to how the general election is going to go, it shows Labour where they are, and if they are, as the polls suggest, way ahead of the Tories. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. It's 2/3 of Labour councils in England are going to the polls. That's more than 8,000 councillors up for grabs. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. But I think these scandals really don't help either party's cause. And the Dominic Raab thing really plays into this idea that the Tory party are the nasty party, that they bully, rule by force, and the rules don't really apply to them. They can do what they want, and people really sort of gathered around Dominic Raab at the top of the Tory party, and it was basically Rishi Sunak had no choice, did he, when that report came out that accused him of bullying.
Stopping the boats, clearly not an easy pledge for the Prime Minister to fill, but extremist rhetoric and a renewed deportation deal with Rwanda was just enough for the Prime Minister to keep the Conservative Party on side, for now. Now, the Archbishop of Canterbury has made a rare intervention in the House of Lords to criticise the Conservative government's illegal migration bill as it faces its first test in the upper chamber. Justin Welby argues against the flagship legislation aimed at ensuring people who arrive in the UK in small boats would be detained and promptly removed, either to their home country or a third country such as Rwanda.
The Archbishop is a man of the cloth, and he speaks as a humanitarian. And the fact is, it is such a challenging bill. We have the issue with regard to people coming over on small boats, but politically it's difficult to see how the government will hold its position by meeting its international obligations in operating this bill. There is a lot of concern, and quite rightly so, because we have refugees mixed up with people who are economic migrants who are being exploited. How will you determine the two, and how will the UK ensure it is meeting its international obligations? It can't be right that certain refugees will be given homes and others will be put on planes.
We have worked so hard over the last 30 years to build this country to where it is. Of course, we understand we have a long way to go. There's many challenges still. We're working on them. And one of the challenges that we're working on is economic development, socioeconomic development. This partnership with the UK is investing resources into Rwanda so that we can continue to do more of what we're doing. We know that we have built a functional country. We are accountable to Rwandans for what we do as a government. Rwandans participate massively in government programs. They trust us to a big extent to lead this country, and this is where we draw our validation from. We are accountable first and foremost to Rwandans, and when Rwandans see their country described like that, they're surprised and they're a bit confused. Where is this coming from? I think people who are against the partnership, it's their right to be against it, but do not insult Rwanda to make a point, especially when it's not true what they're saying.
In other news, more than 85,000 appointments in England have had to be rescheduled because of the latest strike by junior doctors. According to data released by the National Health Service, this latest figure means more than 1.2 million appointments have been rescheduled since industrial action in the health service began in December last year. This, as well as industrial action in other sectors, has wreaked havoc across the British economy. Thousands of nurses across England are continuing to strike in a dispute over pay, while around 1,000 ambulance workers in Wales have also walked out this week. The UK's biggest unions have asked for above-inflation pay rises for its beleaguered members, which the government insists is unaffordable. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says that talks are ongoing and he is keen to find a constructive way forward to bring these strikes to an end. Does there appear to be any way out of this industrial action which is affecting all sectors, not just the public sector, the private sector too?
Yeah, and teachers have joined the party recently as well. Teaching unions, the largest teaching union, around 23,400 schools are going to be affected by strikes in February and in March. And it depends where you are in society, really, as to how affected you are. But everyone really is affected in some way, whether it's train strikes or tube strikes, whether it's ambulance workers, nurses, people in hospitals, and now teachers. And so, yeah, it is really serious. And I think the government haven't really made much progress at all. Occasionally, they will be having meetings with the affected unions, which is better than had happened before when they just weren't talking. So I guess that's slight progress. But yeah, we haven't seen anything resolved as of yet. Ambulance workers are also going to join nurses on the 6th of February. So that'll be a sort of double whammy in terms of two sectors striking at the same time within the NHS. That'll be the biggest NHS walkout so far that we've seen. Then you've got rail strikes that have been happening, and a minister just today saying that the rail strikes have cost more, over £1 billion, than would have happened had they settled, had they given the striking workers what they wanted. It's actually cost more in the long run because obviously so much trade is affected, and the economy overall is affected with people not going to work and people not going to shops, etc. The total strikes, if you look in November of last year, that's the highest number of striking days in a decade, the number of days in 2022 to a 30-year high. So it's really embarrassing for the government, I think, and it's bad, isn't it? They've got a lot of things happening in the UK at the moment that adding to people struggling, and this is just one of them. And it hasn't really helped by the government's response, which is this anti-strike bill, or the so-called anti-strike bill, which they're trying to push through, which basically means that workers will be banned from striking in some sectors, or they could lose their jobs, or unions could be fined if they do strike. And they're trying to push this through to stop the strikes from happening, which I think a lot of people are saying is the wrong way of looking at this. There needs to be a bit of stick and carrot, but they're just giving stick at the moment. And the right to strike is a democratic right that we have in this country, and to lose that, I think a lot of people are quite scared. So there are protests going on at the moment about that. So it's not looking great, and yeah, ministers are not in a great position. And every time Rishi Sunak gets up and tries to defend the government's policy, he says, why are Labour not backing this bill to stop people from striking? Because he's trying to sort of frame this as working people who want to go to work cannot go to work because the trains aren't running and things. Well, there needs to be a little bit of give and take from the government. I think at the moment they're really being very stubborn and putting their head in the sand in terms of how they're going to get out of this, because at the moment it doesn't look like there's any way forward.
I think there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from history, and indeed, strikes are one of the challenges, and that is stemming from the cost of living crisis and a decade of austerity. And I think there are lessons we can learn from history. I think in the interest of time, what I'll focus on is, how can countries learn from episodes of boom and bust that we have seen for centuries. And my book actually covers the last century, which unfortunately had quite a lot of boom and bust, not just in the UK, but in emerging markets and in advanced economies alike. So I think one of the enduring lessons is, there's always going to be boom and bust. So are you prepared for the boom? So in other words, during a recession, there's quite a lot of tendency to cut back on capital spending because that's one of the easier areas to cut. However, if you think about the opportunities for the UK economy and actually for many countries as well in the global economy, the green transition, digitalization, these are things that require investment today to have returns in the future. And so when a recession hits, of course, you need to support households, you need to support firms. So spending is likely to go up. But rather than impose austerity, it's expected that government spending will rise to cushion the recession. So therefore, it's actually a good time to increase capital spending so as bond markets understand that this will generate growth in the future. Because, again, this recession is a bit different because interest rates have risen to counter inflation. The expectations are interest rates are likely to come down over the course of this year because of the recession, in which case borrowing costs are actually still low comparatively to what they used to be. In the UK, used to be 5% before the banking crash. So can a government use this, the interest rate as it begins to come down, explaining to bond markets its growth strategy, and invest so that you can have the kinds of skills and human capital and digital and physical infrastructure that will deliver growth when the economy comes out of recession at the end of this year or the beginning of next year.
Did that theory have a slight bit of Trussonomics, Doctor?
I think you're referring to the former Prime Minister Liz Truss, and yes. I think her focus on growth wasn't supported by policies that made it credible to bond markets, which is why I refer to you have to be able to indicate to bond markets that this is a growth strategy and these are the ways in which you would have financial stability alongside that. So quite a lot of the focus of bond markets and investors and creditors, those who lend to countries, as well as businesses that invest in countries, and indeed politicians actually from across different political parties, is that the UK needs to get its growth rate back up. As I said, it's about a percentage point lower than it was before the banking crisis. It needs to raise productivity. In order to do that, you have to invest. So to me, a lesson from the great crashes, and this is an awful cost of living crisis, but thankfully it's not a financial crisis in the UK. There are opportunities to make sure that the government invests to stimulate innovation, help people acquire skills, help businesses invest with some certainty that this is the strategy, this is the plan, and that means that it would be better positioned when the economy moves out of bust and into booms.
Of course, this week we've had the junior doctor strikes. That's likely to affect GDP data in the coming months as well. And so it doesn't feel like we've seen the end of strikes. And as we've seen in the data today, they do impact output. When people don't go to work, they don't produce, and that affects GDP. And the services sector is by far the largest sector in the UK, and one that usually shows good growth. It's our main source of growth. But actually this month we saw in the data that services contracted slightly, and that's due to strikes in part.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, Dr. Pauline Long, the multi-award-winning entrepreneur, philanthropist and media mogul, joined me in the studio earlier this week to reflect on diaspora trade engagements that have held throughout this year. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Now to my final topic of the year. Dr. Pauline Long is a multi-award-winning entrepreneur, philanthropist and media mogul who joined me in the studio earlier this week to reflect on diaspora trade engagements that have been held throughout the year. Dr. Pauline Long, I've got to tell you, it is an absolute pleasure having you in the Channel's Business Global studio. It's been a long time coming. We've been here for about 5 years, but you are incredibly busy. And I think it's only fair to let our viewers know that even though you are a celebrity, you're not wearing shades because you've had a long night. You're wearing them because you are light sensitive. So for
That's right. That's right. I mean, I know people ask, why are you wearing your glasses? Your dark glasses. Can I try them on? And when I let them try them on, they're like, they're not normal. It's like I feel like I'm going to fall. It's like because they're varifocals, and also I'm light sensitive. So.
And there's a lot of light in the studio, so it's important that you wear them. So I said you are a celebrity, although that's not the reason why you're wearing them.
That's not the reason.
But you're also an AUGP Nobel Peace Prize laureate. You have 3 honorary doctorates.
Yes.
5 International Lifetime Achievement Awards.
I think more now.
I think more.
Yes.
And over 160 community and global awards. You really are.
Okay, I think you've got my old profile.
It's even much more than that.
400 now. That is an old profile.
400.
That needs to go.
400 awards.
Yes.
Now, before we discuss the Commonwealth Business Awards,
Yes.
which you are one of the overseers, it took place, the event, in the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago. I want you, because keeping in theme with this week's show, it's the last show of the year, to talk to me about the investment and bilateral scene over the past 12 months. It does feel as if we're coming back to normal. Of course, we were locked down for a couple of years. So many events that you would typically have held, you were unable to. What's it been like this year? Give us an overview.
I think this year has been quite rushed in terms of business, but also in terms of development in different sectors. Everyone is looking at time and thinking, where did it go? And I think in some ways that's a fantastic thing, which means there has been growth. Things are happening. Look at the diaspora. Even though we've come out of COVID, there was a lot of downtime and downtime for a lot of deaths, a lot of business closures, a lot of people being laid off their work. But then you see that this year suddenly there's a bloom. People there's so many events, and businesses are coming back up, and new ventures. People are not scared to try, and even just to mention the Africa in itself, it's booming. And so I think there's hope for the future. The last 12 months has shown us that yes, economic downtown all over the world existed, but then the progressive growth has been quite visible.
Is the diaspora still powerful? Which may seem like a silly question because, of course, the diaspora is very significant, particularly where we're from, Nigeria. I know you're Kenyan. Yes. We play such an important part. But I'm talking about bilateral discussions. So a lot of the events that you would have had pre-COVID where you're inviting ministers, you're inviting presidents, and they're engaging with the diaspora, are they still doing that?
Yes, certainly this year there's been quite a lot. As you know, I was part of the team that hosted the governor of Akwa Ibom State, the former and current. I was also privileged to host the governor of Niger State at the House of Lords, and all these were due to having roundtable conversations with investors. So I think that there was a delay due to COVID, but not really denial. We're back on track, and I'm proud to see that diaspora is playing a huge role, apart from obviously remittances, which we are known for, which is what diaspora is known for. We are also making huge strides here in the UK, and it's interesting to see that certain African governments and African government leaders are actually quite serious about development in their areas. You find that governors, MPs, mayors from different parts of Africa are coming, into London to seek investments and partnerships, which is much needed, for the near future.
Absolutely. Let's talk about your latest venture, which is the Commonwealth Business Awards. We should be showing some pictures of the event right now. Talk to me about where that idea came from.
The idea came from actually the two great minds, the UK Trade Minister, Trade and Investment Minister, Lord Dominic Johnson, and Lord Taylor of Warwick. And of course, Lord Johnson is interested in bringing together the UK and the rest of the Commonwealth countries, but also the rest of Africa. Remember, Africa has only got 21 members in the Commonwealth, but he's interested in tapping, those other countries as well. So he wants to strengthen the business and trade ties between all of these Commonwealth countries, but also the other African countries that are not inside the Commonwealth. And I think that he spoke about, introducing certain ventures within the Commonwealth. And of course, as you saw, he addressed the crowd, which was predominantly a business crowd. He stressed about business, trade, and I think this is where we are moving. So for me, this venture was quite actually interesting, because people know me for the entertainment side. They really don't know my business or investment.
Really? Gosh, you could have.
They don't know my business side or investment side, and getting involved with funders and investors. And so this is quite exciting. It was the first of its kind, and we carefully handpicked personalities in the diaspora that have contributed immensely in the British economic growth. And hey, surprise, surprise, most of them were, Nigerian.
Yes. Channels Business
really,
Global also got an invite. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm really proud of them. I mean, sometimes people say, why is it just Nigerians? Honestly, they are brilliant minds. And at some point with my team, we were worried. We were like, okay, we really need to mix this, because there's a lot of Nigerians. But then this is a meritocracy society. People need to, acknowledged and merited according to what they've achieved, not according to what country they come from. So absolutely. Kudos to Nigerians. I always say that, in the next life, please God, make me a Nigerian.
You might be one already.
You're
already one, Dr.
Yes.
Pauline. Talking about Nigerians, not just Nigerians, Pan-African society in the UK. Yes. We do love a drink and some food and some pictures, and you tend to see this happening a lot at events. Are we seeing real substance at these events, Dr. Pauline? Because some of them, unfortunately, are just social gatherings, aren't they? And of course, when you climb up the ladder and you realise how business and trade is done at the very top, it can be quite opaque. So typically, a lot of the small to medium-sized enterprises that should be in the centre of these discussions, they're usually passed on because the deal's already been done.
Right.
Are you seeing that, or is it changing?
I'm seeing that, yes, these social gatherings are needed.
Okay.
But I think that we tend to get lost in them. And so that blocks growth. Yeah. We tend to not know how to remove ourselves from some of these gatherings. Yeah. And I love to dress up, as you know.
Yes.
And, I love looking good. And I think that it can be a lonely world if we do not come. Diaspora is lonely already. Yeah. If we do not come out to these social gatherings and meet as community leaders, business leaders, then it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah.
So I think that they are much needed. However, there needs to be a level where an entrepreneur or a business owner says, you know what, time up for this type of gatherings. Let me step back and move into a different arena. Yeah. And I do that with people that I mentor. I kind of steer them. Yeah, there's a time to go to the social gatherings, but there's also a time to go to trade and business events and gatherings. There's a time to sit on round tables with investors, show your ideas, because we are so talented. Oh, goodness. We are such a talented community, like the Africans in the diaspora. Absolutely amazing, brilliant minds.
Dr. Pauline Long, multi-award-winning entrepreneur, philanthropist, media mogul, thought leader, friend to many. Thank you so much for your time today.
Juliana, thank you for having me.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for you today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I will see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Happy New Year.